All right, welcome everyone. Welcome to the very last of this semester's lecture series, of the A. Richard Newton lecture series. Today's guest speaker is Jerry Fiddler. Jerry is the founder, I think most famously, founder of Wind River Systems, a public NASDAQ company. Public NASDAQ company, which he started out of his garage in Berkeley in 1981. And the company grew to 1,100 employees, and it has locations in 16 different countries. I believe that it's part of Intel Corporation today. Yeah, and so it was public and then became part of Intel Corporation. Jerry is a member of the UC President's Advisory Board on Science and Innovation. He's a member of the Board of Trustees of the Mathematical Sciences Research Institute. He sits on several corporate boards, including Wind River, Tensila, Crossbow, Nanochip, and other advisory boards. And currently, therefore, he is the chairman of Solazyme, which is a biotech company that produces fuel, and I'm positive that he's going to talk more about that. I want to say one more thing about his bio, which is that his education is diverse, meaning, or for example, okay, and it's a big secret which only he will describe to you in person. So with that, I'd like to welcome Jerry as our final A. Richard Newton Distinguished Innovator for 2010. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Is this mic working? Does this work? Now, does it? Yes, it works. Hello, I'm very happy to be here, and especially happy to be speaking in the Richard Newton series. Richard was a hero of mine. He was a really wonderful guy. I was on 2 boards with him, 3 boards, actually. Thank you for the kind introduction. So yeah, I started my work career as a computer scientist up at Lawrence Berkeley Lab. I was doing real-time systems, building control systems for things, for big fusion reactors and stuff like that. Left there. I was only there 3 years after school, then started Wind River. And I was there for 23 years, either for as CEO or chairman. Now I'm on a few boards, down to 3 boards. It was 6 about a year ago. But one couldn't fund. Wind River got bought, and then a bunch of other nonprofit things. I have a angel investment fund now called Zygote Ventures, so I'm doing some new investments there, and then do some work here. As Eclock was alluding to, I have kind of a checkered, at least undergraduate career. I started college in 1969. And I was a chemistry major, not because I particularly liked chemistry, but because I'd taken AP chemistry, and it sort of seemed like the right thing to do. It turned out I hated it. That lasted a semester. When I switched to graphic design, what I really wanted to do was photography, but they didn't have it at University of Illinois. So do you want me to stand in one place? The camera is sort of, I'll try to stand in one place for you. That was as close as I could get at University of Illinois. That lasted a semester. And then I went up to the Art Institute of Chicago and studied photography for a year. That lasted a whole year. And then I got out and decided to work as a photographer for a while, which I did. Then decided what I really wanted to do was oceanography. And it turns out Illinois doesn't have an ocean. Who knew? So I got accepted at a couple places on the 2 coasts, but none of them offered me enough money. I couldn't afford it. So I wound up back at University of Illinois thinking geology was close. It wasn't. That lasted a semester. And finally, I decided what I really wanted to be was a musician. And I somehow had to put all this together. And what the university let me do was to put together a custom major around the photography that I already had with the music that I wanted to do. And amazingly, that got me a bachelor's. A BA. So I 5 different majors as an undergrad. I wound up with a major entitled Jazz and the Decisive Moment. The decisive moment is a phrase coined by photographer Henri Cartier-Bresson, who actually there's a really good show of his right now over at San Francisco MoMA that I would recommend. And he talked about how you, as a photographer, you try to get more and more and more into a specific moment that's so fast that nobody can see it, and even you, as a photographer, really didn't know it was there, and so photography becomes a tool for doing that. Jazz was sort of getting at the same thing, and the guy I used there was Miles Davis, who at the time was talking about similar things. So I put those together in a sort of an improvisation major. Amazingly, they let me do this, and it got me a degree. I decided to stick a few photographs in here just because I could. These are things I'm doing now. My son was on the ultimate team at Santa Barbara, the park, Sequoia Park, Antarctica. So I still do, they don't look very good on the projector. It turns out the penguins invented snowboarding. This guy was really good. This is at Death Valley, and that's in Vesco Field when Obama accepted the nomination. And Death Valley again. Anyway, so there I was. I was in Champaign-Urbana, and I was actually playing in a band at the time, and got interested. I started working with a music professor, and he was doing this. This is some work that was done at the University of Illinois around the art. So what you see there is a dancer wearing a leotard that has 64 mercury switches on it. And so basically tilt switches that know, all it knows, they're one-bit switches. They know which way they're tilted, and she has them all over her body. And by playing, by moving her body, there's a very thick cable, and it eventually went to that computer and synthesizer over there and played music. And when I say music, I use the term very, very loosely, but it at least did make sounds. And I found this amazingly exciting, and really this is what brought me to computers. It was really from the arts, and by doing this, and this was one of the first real-time control things I'd ever seen, and real-time control really became most of my career. So this is really what started to get me there. The other thing that got me there was this. This is the Altair 8800, and this was the first computer that somebody could actually own. You notice lots of little switches on there because that's how you programmed it. It didn't have a terminal. It didn't have a display. But you could buy this thing. Actually, you couldn't buy this thing. You could buy a kit to build this thing, which I did. And it had 8 bits. It's kind of hard to read this stuff. But I won't even try to read it to you. But what this did was to turn on a lot of people who couldn't, at that time, a computer was a room. It wasn't something you could own. Certainly wasn't something you could have your own access to. It was something that looked like, at best, it was something that looked like, like this, right? Big racks of stuff. That was a computer. So the fact that you could actually own one was amazing. And those things got me interested enough to apply for a job. The other thing that happened was there was a job available for resident composer for the dance company at University of Illinois, and I thought, well, that sounds pretty interesting. But it was an assistantship. You had to be a grad student, and so those things got me interested enough to say, well, if I'm going to be a grad student, I think I want to do it in computer science. So I applied, and I applied in December 1975 for the January semester. I hadn't taken a GRE. I had no time to take one, and amazingly enough, the professor I talked to said, I think I'll go ahead and accept you, and I was in, and it was that quick and simple. A couple years later, I had a master's degree in computer science. What I did while I was there was to build something, and I built this thing called the Tweed. The text, I don't want to talk much about it, but most people, as you know, in grad school, you find somebody's project, you work on it, you sign on to somebody's to an existing project. I didn't do that. I decided I wanted to build something, and so this is what I built. This is a computer. I think, by the way, this is the first portable computer I've ever heard of. Nobody's ever showed me an older one. So I think I may have built the first portable computer. It was built into this suitcase. It was wire wrapped by hand. Half of this was done by me, and half was done by a guy. I was playing in a band with a guy. He was a bass player. And he said, I really want to get into computers, man. I really want to do computers. And so this was like a Tom Sawyer story. I managed to convince him that the way you learn about computers is by wire wrapping. And so he did about half of this, and he did it for free beer. I later learned I probably should have given him the beer after he was done. A lot of debugging. But, he did it. that was the I couldn't afford a real microprocessor. I luckily got a sample, 4K of 4K, not 4 meg, but 4K of ROM. Anyway, building that, got out, worked at Lawrence Berkeley Lab for a little while, but really wanted to build something else. I'd built something. Now I wanted to build something else, and wound up building a company. And the company was Wind River. What Wind River did was software that controlled things. So it's the software that goes inside lots of stuff. And it's the operating system inside General Motors engines and anti-lock brakes, and Cisco routers, and Nortel phone switches, and Nikon and Canon digital cameras, and lots of robots, including the Honda Ashimo, and missiles, and all kinds of stuff, including a lot of stuff that goes in space. So many, many things that are pretty much any time you make a phone call, your voice is going through Wind River software somewhere. Anytime you use the internet, your data is probably being routed by Wind River software somewhere. The company started in that garage right there. It was a sole proprietorship. Early customers, Francis Coppola, the National Football League. I don't want to talk too much about that because I want to keep going. By the way, my time limit is?
Depending on how many questions you want to take. So basically, we've got till about 6.
Okay. I'm going to move pretty quick then. Company started there, only did one venture round. Started the company in '81 and financed it as a consulting company and on sales until 1990, and then took one and only one venture round of $2.5 million. Went public in '93, got up actually over 2,000 people. We're the first operating system on another planet. We're the operating system for all the Mars rovers, as well as a lot of other stuff. So the way this company worked, what happened is, so go back to that time, and what Wind River is doing is consulting. We're helping people to build projects. And what's happening in the world around us is that 16-bit microprocessors, these amazingly powerful for the time, new microprocessors like the 68,000 were coming around, and they were fully capable of replacing mini computers. But the software wasn't. The software was really poor, and the people who were creating software for these things, as it says there, embedded software was kind of a pathetic little backwater of a market. Nobody was really, it was sort of something that hardware people did, but in the computing world around us was some very exciting things were happening. Unix was coming around, Ethernet, and the very beginnings of what we now think of as the internet were coming around. At that time it was ARPANET. And so we started to look at all of this and say, maybe there's a new way. Maybe by looking at this world around us, there's a new way to do this, to control the world. Because we thought that this hardware was really capable of controlling the world, and today it is. I mean, today everything around us is controlled by these things, but at the time that was not the case. Because at the time, there were these new powerful microprocessors, and they were certainly capable of replacing mini computers. By the way, this is a mini computer. And this is about 5 or 6 feet tall. This is a PDP 11, I don't remember, 11. That's the front panel. If you notice this front panel, this is the front panel for a PDP 1170, a mini computer. And you see all these switches, just like back on that Altair. This is how you entered at least some of the software. This is at least how you booted it. And this is what people thought of as a mini computer. This was a big thing. And here were these little chips that could suddenly control lots of different things. Could control airplanes, could control factories, could control communications. And the big guys, the guys who made this stuff and who made the real software that really made it work, they didn't believe it. They simply couldn't believe that microprocessor was important. They didn't get it. They missed the bandwagon. And that created the opportunity for Wind River. In fact, what they did, DEC, my guess is many of you haven't heard of DEC. DEC is Digital Equipment Corporation. They were far and away the leader in at least control computing for a long time. They're gone now. That was their idea of a microprocessor. It cost a few $1,000s. It was not as powerful as like a 68,000 or an 8086, but that's what they made, and it ran their software, and therefore people bought it. They put it in this big ugly box, and then they got a couple of guys to run it. But this is what they thought of as a microprocessor, and this was not at all what it was. So we saw it as an opportunity. What if we could really take these and figure out a way to develop real software and run it? And that's what we did. So what we did, the way microprocessor development worked then is you had one, you built a box and you had some sort of development computer. They were separate, and you connected them with a serial line running very slow, and then you wrote all your software here and you loaded it over there and you tried to make it run and it never ran and it was a mess and it took forever and ever to do anything. And we looked at that and said, that's stupid, because now we've got the internet. We have Ethernet, 10 megabits per second. So we suddenly started hanging these things there, and it became a real paradigm shift because people would see this, because suddenly we could sit at any computer. Suns were coming around. We used things like Sun workstations. You could open a window, and that was a window into your embedded system, into your camera or your ignition system or whatever it was you were building. Nobody had ever seen anything like that before. And what would happen is engineers would see it, and their jaws would drop. They just couldn't believe it. And I would say 80% of the demos we did resulted in sales. If somebody had the money, they bought it. It was just that simple. There was nothing else like it. The network, which we had added for development, so we had put these things on a network because we thought that was really that was the best way to develop. In fact, that wound up being something that nobody took out, because once they had this network, they realized, well, maybe we could really make this product differently if it's connected. And this was really, I think, the beginning of what we now think of as, you hear now the phrase the Internet of Things, many different things connected. But this was really the first way you could meaningfully connect lots of different devices. And I have to say, it surprised us, because that's not why we put the network in. But in fact, it gave us a really firm lock on the market, because nobody else was doing this. The competition was literally many years behind. And what that did for us is it fueled a lot of growth. So we grew 125% per year growth, more than doubled every year for actually almost 6 years. We're like number 50 on the Inc. 500, and we wound up going public in '93. So this is a log graph, because if you put this on a normal graph, you wouldn't be able to see anything. But you can see the growth was it was more than doubling every year. This is the campus we wound up on. This is actually, this is only part of it. It's a 4-building campus, of which this is 2 buildings, and wound up at one point over 2,000 people. So it's now an Intel company. This is in Alameda, right on the estuary. So this is 2 of the 4 buildings. There's another 2 back here. We did it. 2 engineers did this. I mean, for all intents and purposes, Wind River was created by my partner Dave Wilner and by me. We did it for our own use. We were doing consulting, building systems. We knew we had to have a better way to do it. We figured it out. We used lots of existing code. The first version of our product, there was very little code that we wrote. What we did was we took lots of different pieces from different places. One of them was TCP/IP out of Berkeley. Today, as you probably know, the network code that originated here in Berkeley is all over the world and runs most of the internet. We were actually the first to get it out of here, because at the time it was locked up into a very specific Unix system, and Berkeley was still engaged in a legal battle with AT&T. And we convinced the folks here at Berkeley that together we could get the networking code out of Unix and make it separate, and then we could use it for all this other stuff. So in fact, Wind River was, so we worked very closely with Berkeley, got it out of there, and so this was the first implementation outside of Unix of TCP/IP. And then we used a compiler from some. So we basically got everything we could, very, very high leverage, so all we needed to add was the least bit of glue. But by doing that, we created something very different, as I said, literally years ahead of everybody else. This is one of the things we built. This is the Mars rover. That's actual size, by the way. That was the first Mars rover that went up in '97 in a pretend sandbox down at JPL. I used to have a beard, and my hair used to be darker. And that's probably my one and only sport coat. This is the other part of the Mars rover, the part that you haven't seen. I just love the picture, but this is actually in the lander. There's actually 2 pieces to the rover. There's the robot that crawled around, but there's also a lander, and this is the computer in the lander. And it was a standard VME bus chassis. VME was a standard bus, like ESA bus is on a PC today. So they just made a VME bus chassis out of solid magnesium. They had a big block of magnesium and milled it into a chassis. Okay, so that's Wind River. So what I'm doing, that's not what I'm doing anymore. So, one thing you hear is that lots of people make mid-career changes in their life, and that's certainly what happened to me. I was at Wind River 23 years, and I left there in 2002, 2003, I guess. 2003. And very quickly bumped into some guys working with algae. And so this is one of the problems I started to look at. And this is from a recent, EIA is a government agency, Energy Information Agency or something. I forget what it stands for, but it's part of the US government. And this is their own graph of where the fuel sources are and what the demand's going to be. And that big gap there, where it says unidentified projects, that basically is the part that the Energy Information Agency is saying, we have no idea where the hell this fuel is going to come from. So that seems like an opportunity to figure out where that's going to come from. In fact, where it's going to come from is a lot of different places. Some of it's just going to come from efficiency. We're going to have to figure out how to use less. Some's going to come from solar. So we're coming off of this time where the whole world has been running off pretty much one kind of energy, and that's going to change. We're going to be running, hopefully, off renewables of different kinds. We're going to be on wind and solar. So all of the things, wind and wave and tide, which all have to do with the movement of the Earth, geothermal, et cetera. But one of the pieces that's going to have to be there is liquid fuels, because there's a bunch of things that need energy-dense liquid in order to run. And so Solazyme is a company I hooked up pretty quickly with. I'm chairman of Solazyme. And Solazyme turns sugar into oil. These are the first people that have ever been able to do that. Plants have been able to do it, but people have never been able to do it using plants. So what they do, so Solazyme is a company that grows oil using algae. It turns out that about something like half the Earth's biomass is algae. It's in all kinds of different places. There's many, many, many species. They've been around a long time, way, way, way longer than mammals, 3.5 billion years. And because they've been around so long, and because the Earth has changed so much during that time, they've developed a lot of different talents. They're able to do a lot of different things to adapt to different conditions, because it might be dark, it might be light, it might be a sunny year, it might be the Ice Age. They may live in the dirt, they may live in the water. So they've developed lots of different abilities in biochemical pathways, one of them being the ability to make oil very, very efficiently. And they make oil really for a couple reasons. One reason they make it is to store energy, just like we do. I'm storing a bit too much of it lately. But it's that time of year. And then the other reason is because they got to float. Because if they're living in the water, it's evolutionarily advantageous to be at the top to get the most photons. So if you can make more oil, you float better than the other guys, and you get more sunlight. So they have all kinds of machinery, and they make oil very effectively. But they make it very slowly. So most of the oil that's in the ground, the oil that we're using in our cars, was made by algae, but it was made by algae over a long period of time and many millions of years ago. The Solazyme breakthrough was to realize that even though algae are good at can do photosynthesis, they're not particularly good at it. What they are good at is making oil. And what they decided to do, again, this is just a couple guys. This was two guys, and I'll show you. I'll introduce them to you in just a minute. So they decided, I wonder if these things can eat sugar. I wonder if we can grow them in the dark and feed them something else. And in fact, that's what they're doing. And what it gives us the ability to do is to very quickly grow algae to a very, very high oil content. So these are, as I say, morbidly obese algae. The circle around the outside is the cell wall. This big glob in the middle is all oil. So we get them up to something like 70 or 80% of the dry cell weight can be oil. And we get them there at very high densities, a lot of cells per liter in 4 or 5 or 6 days. So very quickly. I'm going to just show a little piece of
We can go from the cells on this plate to a flask to a large-scale industrial fermenter of hundreds of thousands of liters in a span of days.
How did you guys come up with the idea for this company?
Harrison and I met the first day of college. Flash forward a few years, Harrison develops the idea to use microalgae to produce biofuel, to take a 150 million year process, which is what it takes to make oil that we use in our cars right now, and we condense it to 3 days. And we end up with oil that, when burned, doesn't add additional carbon dioxide into the atmosphere.
What is this
machine, and what am I looking at in here?
You're looking at a green barrel of oil. This is algae producing oil. We take strains of algae and we optimize them for maximum oil productivity, and we put them into these fermenters, which mimic the large-scale production process. You can make all of the things from a regular barrel of oil from this oil. You can make household cleaning supplies, jet fuel, diesel fuel, industrial chemicals, plastics. We take cellulosic feedstocks, raw materials like corn stover, which are the stalks left over from corn, miscanthus grass, any type of biomass. We break it down into its component sugars, and then we feed those component sugars to algae, and the algae convert the sugar directly into crude oil. And then we take that crude oil and we convert it into diesel fuel, jet fuel, really anything that can be made from oil as a starting raw material, we can make renewably using cellulose as a feedstock. It's a very satisfying feeling to have this vision become a reality. We started this company in a garage 7 years ago, and we're now shipping tens of thousands of gallons of oil to commercial scale oil refineries. Now we're actually really doing it at large scale. It's a great feeling. We're driving around San Francisco right now.
I'm gonna stop it there just in the interest of time. But you get the idea. Big stainless steel tanks, 3 stories high, at least, we want to grow at least 100,000 liters up to 1 million liter tanks. And so what this does is you can take lots of different sources of fixed carbon, feed it to the algae. That's just a little lab scale fermenter. And from that, you can make oil. And that oil can be used for lots of different things. In fact, what it is a vegetable oil. It turns out to be not only good for fuel, but we're also making food oils. We're making personal care products. So Unilever's making soaps, renewable soaps, other kind of personal care products, and foods. So there's really several sides of the company. There's fuels and chemicals, there's nutritionals, and health sciences, which is doing things like skincare products. All of this needs to drop right into the infrastructure. So all of this works with existing oil refineries. So one of the things Solazyme is able to do is to be able to craft an oil that's very precisely what's most desirable to make an end product. So if we're making food, we may make an oil with one lipid profile. Soap might be different. If we're making jet fuel or diesel fuel, it may be different still. All of those can be dropped into existing infrastructure and turned into products. And we're making, I think, well, 20,000. In 2010, we made about 350,000 liters of oil. So it's getting to scale. Not quite at full scale yet, but getting there. Maybe one of the most interesting and unexpected things that's happened is a joint venture we just signed with Roquette. Roquette's a very large French food company like a Cargill or an ADM. It's a company that, these are companies that you may have never heard of, but in fact touch and produce at least some of almost all the food you eat. And so this is something where they'll provide feedstock and provide production capacity, and this stuff will find its way very soon, next year, into things like salad dressings and baked goods and stuff like that. And then it's also, so look at this picture, Alginist. You'll be seeing this, I can't tell you where yet, but over the next year, there's actually over the first half of the year, there's an exclusive deal with a very, very large retailer, and you'll start to see this stuff on the shelves. And this is it's something that as we work with the organism, we find out what it does. We find out what are the things it's good at. One of the things it turns out that it's good at, because it's been around for so long, is that there's a molecule in there that actually repairs DNA damage in your skin. Why does algae need to do that? Because it has no control over where it is, and so it sustains insults from the sun in the same way we do. Sometimes, and it can't make the choice to get in out of the sun. It can't get into the shade. So it needs very robust repair mechanisms to protect itself, and those turn out to work very well in our skin as well. So this is actually going to be a really interesting product that'll be out soon. The first big fuel customer is the Navy. This is really exciting. That ship is called a Riverine. It's a high-tech speedboat that the Navy uses, and that's the first boat ever to run on a microbial-made renewable feedstock, or renewable fuel rather. So the Navy has a huge commitment around this. The Navy is committed to running 50% alternative energy on land and at sea by the year 2020. Very, very aggressive. So right now, these guys are actually the leader. They're working really hard to get this stuff. So they're Solazyme's first large customer. And we're providing them with jet fuel that they're testing now in Black Hawk helicopters, and ship diesel that's the first test ship. Quote down there, this is the future. We're going to be running our ships on this. It's pretty amazing stuff. This company is very different than Wind River. Wind River, I told you, we took one and only venture round, one venture round. 9 years after we started the company, we took $2.5 million, went public 3 years after that. This was really different. It's not worth reading all of these, but I want to pop it up there just to show you some of the numbers. $57 million Series C, $60 million Series D. All in all, I don't know, something like $160 million of capital has flowed into this company. This is a very, very different world than software, and it's been really interesting to learn those differences. So why am I telling you about these two companies? As I said, people go through mid-career switches, and here I am. I'm a computer science graduate, chairman of this biotech company. I've learned a lot. One of the things I've learned is these are very different capital creation processes. But another thing is that so let me talk about the differences first. So software, at least, first of all, software is very different now than it was when I did it. You couldn't start Wind River today, because Wind River started by making a product, a proprietary piece of software, licensing that software, and building a substantial revenue base. We got up to about $450 million a year of revenue based on selling our software. In today's world, and we did it with almost no investment, a $2.5 million round of VC and then an IPO. Today is a very, very different world. Today, you've got open source. Because of that, it's much, much harder to monetize a software company. And I've seen very few recent software startups that have been able to get to sustainability. Instead, the model for software companies now seems to be, let's find an interesting strategic niche and hope that X acquires us, where X is Google or Yahoo or Cisco, or you fill it in. That's very different than what we did back then. We were able to build a very profitable company off selling the software. I think that's a much harder thing to do today. Nonetheless, you still can start these companies and do it on a shoestring. Biofuel is very different. Much more capital required. Much, much more capital. The $150 million or so that's flowed into Solazyme, we're just beginning. We're going to need a lot more than that. The government is key here. In every company I've ever worked with, and I've been on a number of boards, worked with a lot of companies, when the question comes up, what can the government do for us? The answer is, leave us alone. We don't want your help. Go away. We're fine. Just, don't screw us up and we're good. In this world, in the energy world, that is not possible because these are highly regulated markets, highly subsidized markets, and you need to work very closely with government, and that really changes the way you build a business, and very different key success factors for doing it. This is especially important now because what's happening is that VC investment is way down. If anything, it's much harder to get cash today than it was. Well, certainly it's a lot harder than it was 2000, 2001. Why? Because there's fewer exits. IPOs are very difficult. Acquisitions, when they're being done, mostly are at a lower price. So those lower returns mean there's fewer VCs. It's also very hard to get debt. What has happened is there started to be a lot more angel activity. That's really what I do now. So my logo here, this is my little angel investment fund, and that's mostly what I do now. So the way you start a company, the way you finance a startup, I think is really, really changing. And it's very different today than it was even 2 or 3 years ago, and very different than it was 10 years ago. But all of that means that cash is king, and in particular, capital efficiency is key. If you can build a company and start it out for a few $100,000, you've got a much better chance at getting it up and running than if you need $3 or $5 million to start. Those are almost impossible to get going now. like I say, do it cheap. So here I am, and I've so two very different companies, really, in a sense, three different careers. So first Wind River doing software, then Solazyme, and now as an investor. And the thing is that all this stuff is moving very quickly, but computers are moving much faster than people. Computers are, we work with Moore's law, where whatever it is you want to measure doubles every 18 months. Maybe we're coming near the end of it, but in any event, we can't keep up with that. You're not going to be able to outthink a computer in the ways that a computer can think. But what we can do is we have access to skills that these digital things don't. And I think, for me, that's very interesting, because the reason I started where I started with this talk and talking about arts and music and the other things I did is I think those are very important skills. And for me, those things have been very important in building a career, and in particular in being able to move from one area to another, because you can't see what's coming. You don't know what's going to come next. You don't know what particular technologies, what particular market niches are going to be important to you in 5 or 10 or 20 years. But in fact, the skills you can develop that really make you a broad and effective person will wind up being effective in a lot of different jobs. Because it gives you the ability to see the world in a way that's unique and valuable. Just going back to what I did at Wind River, you do everything. I mean, I was a leader and a manager and a programmer and a tech writer, and I did IT, and I was a recruiter, and eventually I recruited my replacement, and all these different things. And in order to do all that, you don't train for these things. You don't train to be a manager, or I guess you can. But for me, it's about the broader skills. The skills that have been most important to me in order to be able to move among these worlds and move these various things forward have been, first and foremost, communications. The ability to write well, the ability to speak effectively, the ability to listen effectively. Being able to write a memo or a business letter or an essay or an article or a letter to your congressperson is absolutely crucial. And so I would strongly suggest that you work on those skills. The English classes that we all hated in high school, in fact, turn out to be really, really important. For me, it's interesting that I have my major that was pretty much in improvisation, because for me, that's what my career has been. It's been trying to figure out what's going on. You can always find somebody who's got a particular skill. I can find somebody who can write a program. I can find somebody who can implement a new ERP system. What's really hard to find, and what's a really valuable skill, is the ability to step back, look at the world, and say, this is what's important. To be able to look at to go to a trade show, to talk to a lot of people, to have a lot of conversations, to read a lot of articles, and somehow out of that to distill, this is important, and I think we need to do this. I think we need to go in this direction and work in this way. I think that's a company that should exist, and I should build that company. Certainly, technical is important, and you're going to have to be able to know how to do something. No question. You're always going to be surrounding yourself with people, and the ability to attract and keep good people, to learn from them, and to have a life outside of that, because all of this is a marathon. It's not a sprint. If you're putting all of your time into work, it's very hard to make that last for a long time. So for me, I look at that list, and the only thing there that I got out of my computer science graduate degree is the technical part. The rest comes from all the rest of the education. And for me, that's, if anything, the lesson that I take out of where I've gotten to. That the skills you need to build these things, and the skills you need to see the world effectively, try to make sense of it, have a direction, and work with people in a way that you can actually go in that direction effectively. Most of those are skills you get from being a broad-based, diverse human being, and not strictly, my data structures class didn't teach me to do that. So use your electives. Do something you want to do. I'm just going to skip. I think I'm going to do something you like. I think I'm going to stop there and take questions. Okay? Camera okay if I stand up here? Okay. Questions? Yes? I'm sorry, how did I get my first engineering job? Boy. Well, the first person I worked with was my partner. And what happened is, well, it's an interesting story. So I started Wind River as a sole proprietorship. It was me and my garage. And the company was just getting going. I had one good client. I was working with Francis Coppola. Two things happened the same day. I got evicted, which meant I had no place to live and no place to work. And my girlfriend, she's now my wife, but then she was my girlfriend, got laid off the same day. She's a teacher. So we went out to dinner and said, what now? To sort of commiserate. And halfway through dinner, she said, why don't we go traveling? And so there didn't seem to be a lot of things holding us back. After all, I had no place to live and no place to work. So I thought about it. I thought, well, I've got this company that's just started up. It's only a few months old. I kind of don't want to let it die. Who could take this over for me if I leave? And honestly, there was only one person I could think of who I really trusted at that level, who had both the maturity and the responsibility and the technical strength to do it. It was a guy named Dave Wilner who worked with me up at Lawrence Berkeley Lab. And I said, I'll call Dave. If he'll take it over, I'll go. So I called Dave thinking there's really no chance. He had a young daughter at the time, less than a year old. This was obviously kind of a harebrained idea. But amazingly, he had happened to have a fight with his boss that day and said, I'm in. And so Dave came down, and we moved the stuff from my garage to Dave's family room. Made for interesting fun. His daughter was, we worked out of his family room for a while. And I still remember, we knew we had to move when one client called, and his daughter picked up the phone. She must have been like 2 at the time, and said, my daddy's on the potty right now. So I guess that was the first I don't know if you'd call that a hire, because we turned it into a partnership pretty quickly. After that, what happens is you have to hire by inspiring people, particularly with a startup. You simply can't compete with existing and more mature companies on the basis of salary, certainly not on the basis of security, probably not on the basis of working environment. But what you can do is you can give something to somebody that those companies can't. You can give them the ability to make a real impact. You can inspire them. You can give them a growth path. You let them know that they'll make a real difference. And if there's a direction they want to go, there's a chance that this will really go that way. The people you start with, realize that most people that you hire have a range of company sizes that they're good at. And this is true from everybody from individual engineers to CEOs. CEOs tend to be good within a range. I mean, a startup CEO is not likely to be a good CEO for a $500 million company. There's very, very few people who are good at that whole range. There are people like Bill Gates, but they're far and away the exception. But that's even true of engineers. So you realize that you start with some kind of people. Over time, as things become more established, you can become more convincing, you can tell a more effective story, and you get better at it. But in the beginning, it's all about selling, and it's all about inspiring. You need to inspire somebody to really want to come do this with you. More questions? Yes, please.
So you said that technical skills are really important to start your company, and then I see that you had technical skills to start Innovator, but then when you moved on to a biotech company, you didn't have any background around that. So I was wondering if you could go with that.
Well, I was auditing some classes here. I was auditing a molecular biology class here at Cal at the time, and doing some. So I was beginning to learn, but certainly I was certainly not competent to do anything they were doing. I did get a little bit of lab experience at Solazyme, just to sort of get a feel for it, but quickly realized that I was just in the way in the lab, so didn't do much of it. I mean, at that point, I had developed another set of skills, and that was how you build a company. Because how you build a company, obviously, is different from one company to the next, but it's really more alike than it was different. And so all of the things that you need to do to build a company. How do you finance it? How do you put a board together? How do you hire? How do you find a building, and how big should it be? What level do we believe this business plan, and therefore how much money do we need? I mean, there's lots and lots of things that where there's a lot of commonality, And there was enough that I had something to contribute in those areas. As it turned out, I do some engineering at Solazyme. I built a filtration system, and I've written some software, but I really do that just for fun. They certainly didn't ask me to be the chairman so I could build a filtration system. It's important to understand what the company is doing, but you don't have to be the bench scale scientist to be very helpful in building a company. Yes? Yeah, I'll get them to somebody.
If you want the slides, send me an email.
Yeah, I'd rather not post them somewhere. I'd rather,
Just send
yeah.
me the slides.
Okay.
And we'll get it to people who have.
Okay. And so the only thing I would ask of you is the same. You're welcome to them. Please don't post them. Anybody else? Oh, yes, please.
Building on the point you made about skills required from a startup CEO or different from a Fortune 500 CEO, which ones do you consider the most important for each type success skills for each type?
That's a hard question. Can everybody hear the question? Do I need to repeat it? Okay. So the question is, I mentioned that skills are different for a startup CEO than for a large company CEO. How are they different? It's a very hard question to answer. It might be easier to answer from a point of view of style. Startup CEOs tend to be, let me start at the other end. Large company CEOs tend to be MBAs. Not always the case, but usually the case. They may have started somewhere else, but they're there. They probably have a golf club membership. They're comfortable working with Wall Street. They're comfortable working with a board that's a very high level, disconnected and detached board. Startup CEOs are in a very different environment from that. In a startup, your job is to keep the wheels on, to keep the cash flow coming, to figure out how because things are moving very, very fast. You're not as worried about keeping it stable. You're worried about keeping all the plates spinning because some of them are going to start to fall off, and that's trouble. So they tend to be more people with technical degrees, not MBAs, or something else. Maybe for me the biggest difference, and it's not a skill difference per se, is passion. I think to start a company, you have to really love it. This is, one of the reasons I started Wind River was because I wanted some flexibility in my time. And I learned that my time was in fact flexible as long as it was always. You have no life. As a startup, your business will own you more than you will own the business. And in order to do that and make it work, you've got to really want to do it and have a real passion for it. You have to feel like if I succeed in this, something is important enough is going to happen that it's been worth it to me to wrap my life around this and to do this, to put these years of my life into this kind of a workload. That's not the case for a large company CEO. A large company CEO comes in with typically a substantial paycheck, a fairly regular work schedule. It's a very hard job, don't get me wrong. I'm really not trying to minimize it. But it's a very, very different job.
I'm going to suggest that since it's quick, that we basically have people who want to ask questions now come and
Okay.
talk to you afterwards. So
Thank you very much.
thanks.